Good day, guys. This is another tutorial on AEM 201. I'm going to be treating majorly the calculation aspect of this course, but then the understanding of the topics is as well important in order to be able to apply them into the calculation. So today we are going to be treating demand and supply. Okay, firstly, what is demand? Demand is just the willingness of a buyer to buy commodities or goods at different price range. The very important thing there is the different price range, because there's a difference between the demand and quantity demanded. So at this one is at all levels of prices, but quantity demanded is at certain price. Quantity demanded is the willingness of a buyer to buy a particular commodity at a certain price in a given period of time. So that is the major difference between these two. Demand is at all levels of prices. Quantity demanded is at a certain price. Okay, now the demand curve is downward sloping. It obeys the law of demand, that is, the higher the price, the lower the quantity demanded. The higher the price, the lower the quantity demanded. And why is it that it slopes down? There are so many reasons: the substitution effect, the income effect, law of diminishing marginal return. You must make sure you understand all these things, because they are fond of twisting questions. AEM, they're fond of twisting questions, so you guys need to really understand them. Okay, now that is demand. And another thing worthy of note is that there's always shift in demand. If demand curve increases, the demand curve is just a graphical representation of demand schedule. The graphical representation of demand schedule, and if it shifts, if it goes up, it shifts to the right. If the demand increases, it shifts to the right, and if demand decreases, it shifts to the left. It is also important to note that a shift in demand is as a result of change in every other thing other than price. That's anything that a change in any other thing that is not price. Change in any other thing that is not price, because change in price only moves this thing along the curve. For example, now this is the price, this is another price here. Now by the time you trace it to this place, you see that the quantity demanded is at this point, and by the time you trace it to this point, the quantity demanded now is at this point. So you realize that change in price just moves points along the curve, but then a shift in demand moves the whole curve. So those things that cause shift in demand are every other thing other than price. So it might be change in technology, result of maybe unforeseen events, and all those things. All those things that are not price causes a shift in the demand. The whole demand will shift, but change in quantity demanded is as a result of price. Movement along the demand curve is as a result of price. There are some times where the demand curve doesn't slope downward. That one is as a result of all those luxury goods, Veblen, gifting goods, and the likes. So those are things you guys need to note. The other stuffs that do not follow the usual trend of demand and supply, goods, all those goods that do not follow the usual trend, instead of them sloping down, they slope upward. It's just like now that this new iPhone, I think this new iPhone is out also, people would want to get it very well. The higher it is, the higher the rate at which it will be purchased. It's just all those luxury goods and the likes. Okay, and now there is elasticity. Let's go to elasticity. Elasticity is just the responsiveness of the quantity demanded to the change in price, the rate at which the quantity demanded changes as a result of change in price. That's what elasticity is all about. And how do you measure it? You use, number one, the point elasticity, and then there's also the arc elasticity. There's also the arc elasticity. Point elasticity measures at a particular point, but arc elasticity is like a range. It picks it at 2 points. And then what the formula for point elasticity is actually percentage, or elasticity generally percentage change in quantity demanded as a result of percentage change in price. And I wouldn't bother to go into proving all these things, so let's just go straight into the formula. Let me just go straight into formula because of time. Okay, so for price elasticity is change in quantity as a result of change in price times first price over quantity, price 1 over quantity 1. Okay, and arc elasticity is change in quantity demanded all over change in price times the average price all over average quantity. Remember that we said that this one is arc. It relates to 2 points. This one relates to just 1 point. That's why price 1 quantity 1. But this one relates to 2 points. The 2 points, you find the average, then it represents the value of what you have here, average price and average quantity. Okay, now there are types of elasticity, and then you have the price elasticity of demand, you have the income elasticity, types of elasticity. You have price elasticity, income elasticity, and you also have the cross elasticity. Now we are talking of that of demand. So price elasticity of demand. Price elasticity of demand is just like we've mentioned. This one is at a particular point. So percentage change in quantity all over percentage change in quantity all over change in price times initial price all over initial quantity. Okay, that's the formula for calculating. So if a question goes like probably the quantity demanded for a particular good, maybe the Q1 5, then Q2 is like 10, but equivalent to its price, maybe at Q1 it was bought at the price of let's say 10, and now that it's at Q2, probably the price would have reduced. That's why people can buy more. So maybe it is now bought at 3. You now want to measure the responsiveness of the change in price as this price has changed, reduced. Let's see the magnitude with which the quantity has increased. That's the meaning of price elasticity. That's the meaning of elasticity. So now using this change in price, what's the change in quantity here is 5. Q2 minus Q. The change in this one is minus 7 times price, initial price 1, that's price 1, initial quantity, that's minus 1 point something. Maybe let me keep it in fraction form. Minus 1 whole number 3 all over 7. I'm not with calculator here. If not, I would have kept it in decimal. So that's price elasticity of demand. Now this brings us to the types of price elasticity of demand. Okay, number 1, we have the elastic demand, we have the unitary, and we have the inelastic demand. Okay, now for elastic demand, it means the change in there is a little change in price. I'm trying to explain it with simple words now. With a little change in price, there's a much change in quantity demanded. That's what elastic demand means. So and a very good example is a slope that is gentle, not steep. So this is price 1. Now let me trace it down. This is quantity 1. Now this is price 2, and this is quantity 2. We can see that from just this diagram, there's a small change here, price 2, then there's a great change here, quantity 2. So that's this kind of demand is called the elastic demand. A small change in price leads to a great change in quantity demanded. Okay, and here the elasticity is greater than 0. The elasticity is greater than 1, is greater than unitary. Okay, and for this is for elastic demand. And now we have for unitary is the same change in the same amount of change in price leads to the same amount of same magnitude of change in quantity. This one is the same magnitude of change in quantity. So this is price 1, price 2, then quantity 1, quantity 2. This is for here the elasticity equals 1, then that's a unitary demand. Okay, now let's go to the inelastic demand. For inelastic demand, a little change in price leads to a much little change in quantity demanded. Okay, now for this one, the slope will be very steep, almost standing. So now this is price 1, and this is price 2. Now we're going to trace out the equivalent change in quantity. Now you can see that there's a very great change in price, but then it results into just a little change in quantity. So the change in price results just a less change, less, not greater than it in terms of the quantity. So that's inelastic demand. And as well, we also have perfectly elastic, perfectly inelastic. Now for perfectly elastic, and yeah, this one, the elasticity is less than 1. So in perfectly elastic, it is straight, like an horizontal line, and in perfectly inelastic, it is straight. Perfectly inelastic, it is standing vertically. Remember we mentioned we have price elasticity, we have income elasticity, and we as well have cross elasticity. So the same thing still applies for this one. Is price elasticity. You can also have income elasticity of demand. This one, it depends on the income of the buyer. So it's still the same formula that applies for the point price elasticity, point income elasticity. So to just be the quantity demanded. If you are talking of income elasticity of demand, if you are talking of the income elasticity of demand, then it will just be Remember, for price, it was change in quantity as a result of change in price of the product, times, that's for point price elasticity, times price all over quantity, that's price 1 quantity 1. Now the same thing still applies, just that for income elasticity it becomes change in quantity demanded as a result of change in income of the buyer, times times income initial divided by quantity. That's just it. And if you are talking of the hack, remember this one is for the point elasticity, and if you are talking of for the hack elasticity, it then becomes change in quantity as a result of change in income times the average income all over average quantity. So that's income elasticity. And last one is the cross elasticity. Now cross elasticity relates to products. It relates to products, that's product X and product Y. Okay, now it means that the change in quantity demanded of product X is affected by change in price of another product Y. So it relates two different products together. So change in quantity demanded is affected by change in price of another product. Just like if Biggie Apple now decides to sell his own product at 200 naira, Biggie Apple, and all other ones like Pepsi, Coca-Cola and the likes, they are still at 100 naira, people would leave that of Biggie and go for the one that is 100. It's rational. Humans are rational, so it's normal to do. People will leave, instead of buying 200 naira, you will buy two of other ones. Then you realize that as a result of the fact that the price of one product has increased, products that they can be substituted, you can decide to use this one and you not use that one. By the time you see that the price of this one has gone up, the quantity demanded for this other one that is still at the same price would increase. There is no how it would increase. So in that case, we can calculate the cross elasticity. So the formula still remains the same. The point cross elasticity is when change in quantity demanded of price of quantity X as divided by change in price of quantity Y times price of that quantity Y, initial price of quantity Y, all over initial quantity of commodity X. That's a point. And when you are talking of the hack elasticity, you have quantity, change in quantity X, change in price Y times average price for quantity or for commodity Y and average quantity for commodity X. So that's for arc elasticity. So for supply, the same thing that applies to demand still applies here. Supply is just the quantity of goods and services suppliers are able to sell at different price range. And when you are now talking of quantity supplied, this one is the willingness of a seller to sell at a certain price, that is the amount of quantity of goods and services a supplier is able to sell at certain price in a given period of time. So that's the difference. And the supply curve slopes upward. The supply curve goes upward like this, as the higher the price, the higher the quantity demanded and the likes. The higher the price, the higher the quantity supplied. As a result of the fact that price is going high, a rational seller will want to pump more of his products into the market. So as price is going higher, supply also is going higher. But the case is opposite for demand. As price goes higher, demand goes lower. Now the whole thing we've been mentioning for demand, I wouldn't want to go over them. The elasticity of demand, everything, it still applies for supply. So I wouldn't want to go into that. Now this time around, let's now go into the demand and supply. In a free market, price is determined by the interaction of the supply and the demand. Price is determined by the interaction of demand and supply. The point where they meet is the equilibrium point. By the time you trace it to the price, this is now the equilibrium price. By the time you trace it to the quantity, this is the equilibrium quantity. Okay, now that's just a question. It's always I think it comes out very well. In a free market, price is determined by interaction of demand. In a free market, price is determined by the interaction of demand and supply. Now, what happens to, there are certain things that happens to demand. Probably if peradventure there is a shift in demand and supply remains the same, or there is a shift in supply, demand remains the same, what are the things that can happen? Okay, let's start with supply being constant. This is the supply curve being constant. Now this is the initial demand, and there's an increase in demand. Remember we said increase in demand is as a result of every other thing that is not price, and it shifts up, it goes to the right. Okay, now remember this is our initial. Okay, I think for better understanding, let me use different colors. So let's assume this is the supply. Now this is the demand, initial demand. So let me trace it out. This is the initial equilibrium price, this is the initial equilibrium quantity. What if there is a shift in the demand curve? If there is a shift in the demand curve, then remember, a shift in demand curve moves the whole curve, and if it is increasing, it shifts to the right. Now if it shifts to the right but the supply still remains the same, what happens to the new equilibrium? What happens to the equilibrium price and equilibrium quantity? Let's trace it out. You realize that equilibrium price increases and equilibrium quantity as well increases. So if there is an increase in demand and supply is constant, it means the equilibrium price would also increase. Equilibrium quantity will as well increase. What if there is a decrease in demand? That means it comes down like this. It comes down. That's decrease in demand, comes down. Now what happens to the new equilibrium? What happens to the equilibrium price and equilibrium quantity? You realize that the equilibrium price reduces as well as the equilibrium quantity reduces. So a decrease in demand, equilibrium price decreases, equilibrium quantity as well decreases. Okay, now let's go to shift in supply when demand remains same. If the demand remains the same, this is the demand, and there is a change. Let me draw the initial supply. This is the equilibrium price, equilibrium quantity. if there is a shift in the demand, in the supply, if the supply goes upward, supply moving up, supply increasing means it shifts to the right also. So this is the right, it shifts to the right this way. This means the supply has increased. Now let's trace it. If the supply increases and the demand remains the same, what happens to equilibrium price? What happens to equilibrium quantity? So now this is equilibrium price 2, this is equilibrium quantity 2. You realize that equilibrium price reduces and equilibrium quantity increases. An increase in supply would make the equilibrium price reduce and the equilibrium quantity increase. Okay, now let's see what happens if there is a decrease in supply. Now if the supply goes this way, as there's a decrease, it goes left, what happens to equilibrium price and what happens to equilibrium quantity? So equilibrium price, equilibrium quantity, equilibrium price increases. You see that equilibrium price increases and equilibrium quantity reduces. So a decrease in supply leads to equilibrium price increasing, equilibrium quantity reducing. Okay, I want to believe we have concluded demand and supply. So the rest you guys can just follow up in your notes. I believe these are the difficult aspects of the course. You guys should read, note out points. They always love to twist questions, so make sure you read and understand it. And I wish you guys success in your forthcoming exams and tests.